Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carasoft on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is Chris Ahern, the Vice President of Federal at Smartsheet. Now, Chris, before break, we were talking a little bit about this idea of legacy modernization, this idea of collaborative work management, and how that's really kind of started to take off, and agencies are understanding the need. You mentioned the idea and the connection to low-code, no-code platforms, and there's always, when I talk to CIOs and others, maybe a bit of a concern that starts to rise up. Well, we want to make sure the guardrails are set. We don't want to give people too much leeway, because then you start getting shadow IT, you start getting, if you will, programs that are not meeting our security goals. So how do you kind of find that right balance between democratization, but not, now we have a security problem or a governance problem or 10 versions of Smartsheet everywhere?
Sure. In CWM, and I'm just relaying something Gartner and Forrester both say. I mean, typically in an organization, it can start pretty small, and frequently, in IT terms, that means shadow IT. Somebody has a credit card, goes out and buys a license, and kind of jumps in and gets going. I think what we've seen in the federal market, though, quite candidly, is there's a lot less of that going on. They need to get IT involved earlier. What we do see, as a concern from CIOs and whatnot, obviously they have their compliance and ATOs and single sign-on mechanisms that we need to tie into, and those sorts of things. And they have the expectation that, just like those, say what you want about legacy systems, they're very secure, right? And, anything you're doing on the cloud, by nature has to be, secured to the standards that the government has set out there. So, my advice is always, make sure you look under the hood, and that, whatever platform it is, that you're looking at has all the standards, and candidly is kind of built from the ground up to be secure, right? Because protecting government data is paramount for them and for us, quite candidly.
When you talk to agencies and customers about offering this kind of, or using this low-code, no-code platform, do they set up, okay, we'll allow it, but here's some of the perimeters, and what's the conversation like?
Kind of interesting, to be quite honest. I think there's different, kind of gradations of what we get.
It's almost like the risk, right? How much risk?
Yeah. Well, in some cases, it's, they adopt it fully, and this is great, and we do meet a lot of the security standards and requirements and things like that, and we have a lot of people on our team that speak their language, right, which helps a lot too, and they embrace it fully. NOAA is is a customer such as that for us. Others are they're looking at, they've got tool sprawl, and there's a lot of different things out there, and we get to the point with them where they're like, oh, okay, we'll allow it, in our environment, and it tends to grow from there. And then there are other agencies who are a little more discerning about cloud in general and those sorts of things. So it tends to run, it just tends to vary by customer, but they all have their own processes and ATOs and things like that. So I mean, we operate under FedRAMP, but they still do their own thing. So.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big challenges when it comes to the cloud is FedRAMP, but plus sometimes, or FedRAMP moderate to FedRAMP high and the like. The other piece of this, and you mentioned NOAA, you mentioned some other customers. Walk me through maybe how they're using Smartsheet, but also what are you seeing from them to understand why low code, no code, and the collaborative work management is beneficial?
Yeah, I think a good example within NOAA is NOAA Fisheries, and this is mostly in their IT department. This is a few years back. They had a huge backlog of projects, and they were just quite candidly, we're having trouble keeping up. And we were able to work with them, and put a program management office in place and a framework around that they worked off of. And at the end of that, they were able to get their people trained rather quickly, and they were able to achieve 40% productivity from the same number of staff. They also, management liked that they reduced the risk, because they had visibility into what was going on all the projects at all times. I remember Roy Varghese, who's actually at US Mint now,
U.S. courts.
U.S. courts. Sorry, Roy. I was talking to him at one point, and his comment was, we deployed it, and then I came, a few months later as a manager, and I said, hey, you can work in anything you want, but the only thing I'm going to look at, for my reports and edification and those sorts of things is Smartsheet. And then he said everybody kind of shifted over to it. So that was one where, fairly tangible, and there were some stories published about that and those sorts of things. So it's out there, and their mission is pretty important.
The reduction in the increase in productivity, or the 40%, and then the reduction in risk. Why? Is it because they had the right data? It goes back to the beginning of our conversation, or they had data in real time, or what, or how, or why? You fill it in.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think from a project management perspective, a lot of the alternatives out there, kind of in the older generation of solutions are desktop based, and they're difficult to share. And, consequently, because almost every project involves multiple people, multiple teams, and those sorts of things, it becomes a natural bottleneck if you can't share the data in terms of what's going on, right? And, typically, if I'm running a project, I need people to review, various documents and things like that. I need people to approve things. I need those sorts of things. And doing that in some of the old school legacy products, if you will, is difficult to do. So it was really that ability to kind of have a simpler interface and get more work done and allow people to see what you're doing. So.
If you're sharing spreadsheets, someone becomes the bottleneck. All of a sudden, it's like, why isn't Chris giving me the spreadsheet so I can look at it? Well, Chris is busy, or Chris is off today, or you fill in the blank, and all of a sudden, that project kind of slows down because we're waiting on Chris. I think that's what the solution, in many ways, it's solving. It's, okay, well, Chris isn't here, but somebody else can look at it, or we can see what's happening. And I think that's the productivity increase. Imagine that type of bottleneck.
Or did Chris send you the right version? Which is something that you need to keep control of as well. When you mention data, what's authoritative, what's up to date, right, and those sorts of things. And in a cloud-based instance, everybody single source of truth, probably a little bit overused, but there's a lot of validity to it. So.
Great example of NOAA fisheries. I think a lot of agencies probably have very similar challenges. So I think it's always helpful to see, okay, that's how they solved it. Let's maybe look forward a little bit. As agencies continue to modernize, we've heard a lot about network modernization. There's obviously the continued push to the cloud. There's also this idea of creating this hybrid work environment. Where do you see, what's the trends you're kind of looking to or expecting to see in the next 3-5 years or so?
Yeah, I think some of the stats and figures I shared with you earlier from the analysts. I mean, I think it has so much promise in the government, to kind of allow this innovation at the edge. And I think, parts of government and enlightened government leaders, in the past have really kind of believed in that. I don't know if they were the norm before, but I think it's becoming the norm more and more. So I do believe that, democratization of technology and that ability for, innovation on the edge and for people that are, power users or users to make a really big impact in terms of building software capabilities that really drive innovation and modernize systems, quite candidly.
That democratization piece are you finding that agencies are needing to train the workforce? How much is this kind of bottom up versus top down, that democratization piece?
I think it varies. I mean, a good story of one of our customers is in the Army Corps of Engineers, and the woman's actually a cartographer. And she manages right-of-way applications on, federal and Corps-owned lands down in Southwest United States. And she, of her own will and volition, was sort of looked at the processes that they had in place, which were very manual. Fill out a form, send us the form, it'll go to somebody, then we'll, she built an intake form that, takes the application in. It then goes into kind of a workflow setup she has where it works through the approval or disapproval process, and then ultimately renders a decision that, goes out automatically to the applicant. And along with that, built dashboards and reports and things like that for her management to be able to manage. And I would imagine across the board there's probably hundreds of thousands of these, maybe thousands in her region, to be able to manage that. And she's a cartographer. Which I think is just it's a great testament to that potential that I think the federal government and federal leaders see out there. She actually won a Innovator of the Year award in her region.
Nice.
For doing that. So I think that's typically the way it starts, right? And then folks like that, a lot of times you see leadership, saying, well, wait a minute, we do this in I think it's 27 regions across the country, right? We're not there yet, but I think once it gets their attention, and generally the dashboards and having that real-time visibility, you mentioned data earlier. I mean, we fit into a data ecosystem in that we can integrate with various systems where it's needed for people to execute their work or to execute their projects. We're also a producer of data because the data that we generate on what's getting done and how projects and processes and different things are progressing is relatively unique. I mean, it's not something that leaders are used to having, and once they get it, they catch on pretty quick.
There's definitely a thirst for that data. Oh, okay, now I see it. And I think the same thing, I think the cartographer example is a great one because it's not just the tech people. You mentioned no fisheries with an IT project management, but I imagine that this type of democratization of low code, no code, and this type of collaborative work management can be used in other areas of the government, whether acquisition or finance or wherever.
Yeah. No, on the acquisition side, I mean, it's the ultimate team sport right there. And, the focus on frictionless acquisition, I mean, one of the key components of that is having a data architecture in the background to allow people to, do their jobs. And you think about everything a contracting officer has to do and all the different stakeholders that they have, the end user, the budget people, the legal people, the technical buyer, and any number of different people that, they have to get approvals on. And, I remember a time when that was all in a manila folder, right? That got walked around the office and everything.
And it got stuck on your desk.
And was usually not on mine,
Okay.
but it was a tremendously manual process. And something like that, in a CWM environment or a Smartsheet environment, and that we have customers that are doing that. They're putting out web-based forms, that are Smartsheet forms for responses to RFQs and RFPs. So
it shows just where this is going. I think it's an important idea that the collaboration is when you're not working in the office. When I can't walk down the hall and say, hey, Chris, can you look at this? You got to have something where we all can look at it at once, and it's got to be something more than just a shared file on the main drive or something. So I think that you're right. I mean, it sounds like the pandemic helped cement the vision or the path a lot of agencies are going down, and I think we're going to start seeing more of it as in the future.
Yes, I tend to agree.
All right, very good. Well, Chris, unfortunately, we're out of time for today, so let me thank my guest. Chris Ahern is the Vice President of Federal at Smartsheet. Chris, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search innovation.